Millionaire abandons wife. 33 years later, he sees her at the restaurant with a young man who looks. The luxurious boardroom at Thompson Real Estate Development fell silent as Richard Thompson, the 68-year-old CEO, suddenly gripped his chest and collapsed. His wife Victoria, who was 20 years younger and dressed impeccably in designer clothes, rushed to his side, crying out for help. But while others were distracted by the commotion, she secretly pulled out her phone and snapped photos of the confidential documents scattered across the boardroom table. "Someone call 911. Victoria's voice trembled with practiced concern as she held her husband's hand. Her other hand, hidden from view, continued taking pictures. Across town, in the peaceful practice halls of the New England Conservatory of Music, Sarah Mitchell was preparing for her afternoon class when her phone rang. The caller's words made her heart stop. "Mrs. Mitchell, there's been an accident at Thompson Enterprises. It's about your son." Meanwhile, in a sleek office at Morgan Stanley, Matthew Mitchell watched the entire scene unfold through the security cameras he had access to. His jaw clenched as he observed Victoria's performance. At 32, he was the spitting image of Richard Thompson in his younger days. A fact that had helped him climb the corporate ladder while keeping his true identity hidden. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their assessment grim. "Mr. Thompson, you're having serious cardiac issues. We need to get you to the hospital immediately." While the medical team worked, Victoria slipped away to the ladies' room. Her manicured fingers quickly deleted compromising messages from her phone. One text caught her eye before she erased it. "Everything's set with the SEC investigation. They won't know what hit them." Outside the building, a private investigator hired by Matthew snapped photos of Victoria's secret meeting with her lover, a high-ranking SEC investigator. The pictures would prove invaluable later, but for now they were just another piece in Matthew's carefully constructed plan. Back in his office, Richard had regained consciousness, but remained shaken. His hands trembled as he opened his private safe, searching for important documents. Instead, he found something that made his blood run cold. A fake will he had never created, perfectly forged with his signature, leaving everything to Victoria. "This is impossible," he whispered, his face pale. The documents in his hands revealed an elaborate plan to transfer ownership of his company, his life's work, right under his nose. In her office, Victoria's phone buzzed with a message that made her perfectly painted face turn white. "He knows. Execute Plan B." She looked out the window at the Boston skyline, her mind racing. Everything she had worked for over the past 15 years was at risk. The careful manipulation, the secret accounts, the planned takeover, it could all fall apart if she didn't act fast. At the conservatory, Sarah sat at her cherished piano, her fingers hovering over the keys as she processed the news about the incident at Thompson Enterprises. After 33 years of protecting her son from his father's world, it seemed the past was finally catching up with them. Matthew closed his laptop, his expression grim. The security footage had given him exactly what he needed, proof of Victoria's deception. But it had also shown him something unexpected, his father's vulnerability. For the first time, Matthew saw not the powerful man who had abandoned his mother, but a frail human being betrayed by those closest to him. As night fell over Boston, each player in this unfolding drama prepared for their next move. Richard, now home in his penthouse, stared at the fake will with shaking hands. Victoria made discreet calls to offshore accounts. Sarah played a melancholy tune on her piano, remembering the past. And Matthew reviewed his plan for the hostile takeover that would change all their lives forever. None of them knew that tomorrow's dinner at the Golden Pearl would bring them all together in a way that would expose decades of secrets, lies, and hidden truths. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of everything they had built their lives upon. The Golden Pearl restaurant buzzed with Boston's elite as Richard and Victoria Thompson arrived for dinner. Richard's hand trembled as he adjusted his tie, still weak from yesterday's collapse. His eyes darted around, noticing a man in a dark suit who had been following them since they left their penthouse. "Darling, I need to make a quick call," Victoria said, stepping away. Instead of heading to the ladies' room, she slipped through the kitchen into the back alley where James Parker, Her SEC investigator lover waited. "The board meets tomorrow," James whispered. "Once they see the evidence we planted, Richard won't know what hit him." Inside, Richard sipped water, trying to steady his nerves. That's when he saw her, Sarah Mitchell, walking into the restaurant. 33 years had passed, but he would recognize her anywhere. Her hair was silver now, but her grace remained unchanged. But it wasn't Sarah that made Richard's heart stop. It was the young man with her. Tall, confident, with the same green eyes and smile Richard used to see in his own mirror decades ago. The resemblance was uncanny. Victoria returned just as Sarah and the young man were being seated nearby. Her face showed a flash of recognition before she could hide it. "Mr. Mitchell, what a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I'm Victoria Thompson. We spoke on the phone." Richard's mind raced back to 1983. He was a struggling real estate agent when he first met Sarah at that small coffee shop near her music school. She believed in him when no one else did. The memory of her selling her beloved piano to fund his first real estate deal hit him like a punch to the gut. "Mr. Thompson," Matthew extended his hand. "Matthew Mitchell, from Morgan Stanley. Shall we discuss the future of your company?" Richard barely heard the words. His eyes kept moving between Matthew and Sarah, pieces of a puzzle he should have solved years ago falling into place. Victoria's phone buzzed. A message from her private investigator. "Mitchell owns 15% of Thompson Enterprises stock, purchased through shell companies over the last 6 months." Sarah watched the scene unfold, her heart racing. She noticed Richard's pale complexion, the slight tremor in his hands, the same signs she'd seen before his first heart attack 15 years ago, right before he left her. "The company's financial records show some irregularities," Matthew stated, opening his laptop. "Care to explain the transfers to the Cayman Islands, Mr. Thompson?" Richard loosened his tie, feeling the pressure in his chest building. Victoria's hand gripped her purse where she kept the incriminating photos of Richard's past dealings. Insurance for moments like this. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Victoria suggested, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. "No." Matthew's voice was firm. "Everything needs to be on the table. After all, we're all family here, aren't we?" The word family hung in the air like a thunderclap. Richard's face went ashen. Victoria's mask of composure cracked slightly. Sarah closed her eyes, 33 years of secrets threatening to spill out. A waiter approached with menus, oblivious to the tension. "Would anyone like to start with drinks?" "Water," Sarah said softly, her eyes meeting Richard's for the first time. "Just water." Richard clutched his chest, feeling the familiar tightness. Sarah half rose from her chair, maternal instinct overriding decades of hurt. Victoria noticed but was too busy texting James. "He's here. The son. What do we do now?" Matthew watched it all, his carefully planned takeover shifting into something more personal than he had intended. The documents in his briefcase, the evidence of fraud, the planned hostile takeover. Suddenly all of it seemed secondary to the human drama unfolding at the table. The man who had been following Richard stepped closer, speaking quietly into his earpiece. Outside, James Parker made a call to his SC superiors. And somewhere in the kitchen, a waiter carried a bottle of wine to their table, unaware he was serving the first course in a dinner that would change all their lives forever. Sarah reached for her water glass, trying to hide her concern as Richard's breathing became more labored. She knew the signs too well, the way his left hand trembled, how he kept touching his chest. "Mr. Thompson, are you all right?" she asked, her voice calm and professional, as if she hadn't spent 15 years of her life with him. "He's fine," Victoria snapped, but her eyes were fixed on her phone under the table. Matthew pulled out a document from his briefcase. "Before we discuss the company's future, there's something you should see, Mr. Thompson." Richard's mind drifted back to 1983. Sarah at her beloved Steinway, playing Chopin, while he shared his dreams of building a real estate empire. The day she sold that piano, her family's legacy, to save his failing first development project. He had promised to buy her an even better one someday. A commotion near the restaurant's entrance caught their attention. 2 men in suits were arguing with the maître d'. Victoria's face tensed as she recognized them, corporate security from Thompson Enterprises. "There's been a break-in at the office," one of the men announced, approaching their table. "Someone accessed the main vault." Victoria's phone buzzed again. A message made her face go pale. DNA test confirmed. Richard has another child, born 1992. Sarah used the distraction to slip Matthew a small key. "The documents are still in the piano," she whispered. "All these years, right under the lid." Matthew excused himself, mentioning a business call. Instead, he headed to the New England Conservatory. The night guard, expecting him, led the way to his mother's studio. The Steinway stood silent in the moonlight, the same piano his mother had sold 30 years ago, which he had tracked down and bought back last year. Inside the lid, yellowed papers documented years of fraud, backroom deals, and betrayals. Back at the restaurant, Richard struggled to focus as the security team detailed the break-in. Someone had accessed files going back to the 1980s, records he thought he had destroyed years ago. "The safe in your office," Victoria said, her voice tight. "Was it opened?" "Everything's gone," the security guard confirmed. Sarah watched Victoria's reaction, remembering the day she discovered those documents. It was right after Richard left, when she was cleaning out their home. Hidden behind his collection of rare wines, a folder full of evidence that could have destroyed him. But she had chosen to protect him then, for the baby growing inside her. "We should have this discussion somewhere more private," Victoria suggested, standing up. "No," Matthew said, returning to the table. "Everything comes out now." He placed an old photograph on the table, Richard and Sarah standing in front of their first real estate office, a coded message written on the back. "How did you get that?" Victoria demanded. "The same place I got these," Matthew replied, producing more documents. "Mother's piano has been quite a vault." Richard stared at the photograph, remembering the day it was taken, the same day Sarah had told him she'd sold her piano to help him. The guilt he'd carried all these years suddenly felt heavier. "You kept everything," he whispered to Sarah. "Not for revenge," she replied quietly, "for protection." Victoria's phone lit up with an urgent message from James. "Politician involved. Get out now." Sarah noticed Victoria's panicked expression. "I recognize him, you know," she said. "James. He was my student before he joined the SEC." The color drained from Victoria's face as her carefully constructed plan began to unravel. The corrupted SEC investigator, the politician they had bribed, the offshore accounts, all connected to a piano she never knew existed. Matthew watched his father's reaction carefully. The man who had abandoned his pregnant mother was now trapped in a web of his own making. But something in Richard's eyes, regret perhaps, made Matthew hesitate. A waiter approached with their meals, but no one was thinking about food anymore. The old Steinway piano had kept its secrets for 30 years. Now, like a symphony reaching its crescendo, those secrets were about to change everything. "That's not all the piano held," Sarah said softly, her eyes meeting Richard's. "There's one more thing you need to know. Your company isn't just facing SEC investigation, Mr. Thompson," Matthew said, spreading documents across the table. "You're looking at federal charges of money laundering." Victoria's hand tightened around her phone. James had warned her this might happen, but not so soon. Not here. "These transactions," Matthew continued, pointing to a spreadsheet, "over $50 million moved through shell companies in the Cayman Islands." "Care to explain?" Richard loosened his tie, looking at Victoria. "I never authorized these transfers." "Of course you did, darling," Victoria said smoothly. "Remember the papers you signed last month for the new development project?" Sarah watched the exchange, thinking back to 15 years ago. She had discovered Victoria's true nature too late. The day she went to warn Richard, she found him packing his bags instead. "I have proof," Matthew said, "that these transactions were authorized using a forged signature. Mrs. Thompson, would you like to explain why your lover at the SEC helped set up these accounts?" Victoria's composure cracked. "How did you?" "I've been watching you for months," Matthew revealed. "Every meeting with James Parker, every phone call, every secret rendezvous. Did you really think you could steal millions without someone noticing?" Richard's face went pale. "James Parker, your old student?" he asked Sarah. "Yes," Sarah replied. "The same James Parker who helped you hide assets during our divorce." The truth hit Richard like a physical blow. James had been playing both sides all along. "There's more," Matthew continued. "The development project in South Boston, It's a front for washing money from political kickbacks. The governor's office is involved. Victoria stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I'm calling our lawyers. Sit down. Matthew's voice was steel. Or should we discuss the offshore account in your maiden name? The one with $20 million of embezzled company funds? Sarah touched Matthew's arm gently, seeing the anger in his eyes. The same anger she'd worked so hard to help him control growing up. I tried to find you, Richard said suddenly, looking at Sarah. 5 years after I left, but you had disappeared. I had to, Sarah replied, to protect our son. The word hung in the air between them. Richard looked at Matthew, really looked at him, and felt his chest tighten again. Victoria's phone buzzed. A message from James. FBI involved. Destroy everything. You're bluffing, Victoria said to Matthew. You have no real proof. Matthew pulled out another document. This is a letter from your co-conspirator at the governor's office, very detailed about the kickback scheme. He turned state's evidence this morning. A waiter approached their table but quickly retreated, sensing the tension. All these years, Richard whispered, you've been stealing from me? You made it easy, Victoria snapped, her mask finally falling. So trusting, so eager to believe I loved you, just like you believed Sarah back then. An anonymous text appeared on Matthew's phone. Back off or your mother pays. Sarah noticed Matthew's expression change. What is it? Nothing, he said, but his hand gripped the table edge. Richard reached for the documents, but his vision blurred. The room seemed to spin. Dad? Matthew said, the word slipping out before he could stop it. Victoria laughed bitterly. How touching. The prodigal son returns. Tell me, Matthew, does your sister know you're here? Matthew froze. What sister? The one Richard had with his secretary in 1992. Victoria smiled coldly. Another family he abandoned. Richard shook his head. That's impossible. The DNA test results arrived today, Victoria said. Apparently, abandoning pregnant women is a habit of yours. Sarah stood up. This needs to stop. No, Matthew said. We're just getting started. He pulled out one final document. This is a notice of hostile takeover. As of this morning, I control 30% of Thompson Enterprises voting shares. Richard clutched his chest, the pain returning. You can't do this, Victoria protested. Actually, I can, and I will. Matthew's voice was calm. Unless. Another text lit up his phone. Final warning. Walk away or she dies. The restaurant had emptied around them, the other diners sensing the growing storm at their table. In the kitchen, James Parker waited for Victoria's signal. Outside, FBI agents were taking up positions. The game was far from over. Richard slumped in his chair, his face ashen. The pain in his chest was getting worse. Someone call an ambulance, Sarah said, her medical training from years of teaching music to special needs children kicking in. He's having another attack. No hospitals, Victoria snapped. This is just another one of his acts. Matthew pulled out his phone to call 911, but another threatening text made him pause. Call anyone, and your mother won't make it home tonight. I've known about the frauds for years, Sarah said quietly, checking Richard's pulse. Since the day you left, I found everything. The fake contracts, the bribes, the shell companies. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Then why didn't you expose him? Because revenge wasn't worth destroying my son's father. Sarah's voice was steady. Unlike you, Victoria, or should I say Catherine Williams. Victoria froze. How do you? You were in my advanced piano class at Boston Conservatory, 1989. You dropped out after your father's investment firm collapsed, changed your name, reinvented yourself. Matthew looked between them, pieces clicking into place. That's why you targeted Dad? Revenge for your father's bankruptcy? Your father's company destroyed mine, Victoria hissed at Sarah. Thompson Enterprises bought out Williams' investment for pennies on the dollar. Richard struggled to speak. I never knew you were Henry Williams' daughter. Of course you didn't, Victoria laughed bitterly. You never looked past the pretty young assistant who laughed at your jokes and stroked your ego. A commotion near the kitchen drew their attention. James Parker was being escorted out by FBI agents. Victoria reached for her purse, but Matthew was faster. Looking for this? He held up a USB drive. Your insurance policy? James already gave us copies of everything. You don't understand, Victoria said, real fear in her voice now. There are people involved, powerful people. Like Governor Harrison? Matthew pulled out another document. We know about the kickbacks, the laundered money, everything. Richard's breathing was becoming more labored. Sarah pressed a nitroglycerin tablet under his tongue. She'd recognized the symptoms from their years together. There's something else you should know, Victoria said, desperation creeping into her voice. About your sister. Half-sister, Matthew corrected. No, Victoria touched her stomach. Your full sister. I'm pregnant, and it's not Richard's. The revelation hung in the air. Richard looked at his wife of 15 years, seeing her clearly for the first time. The baby is James's, Victoria continued. But the trust fund I set up is in your name, Matthew. Insurance, in case anything went wrong. Sarah's hand found Matthew's under the table, steadying him. Don't let her manipulate you. Everything I did, Victoria's voice cracked, I did for revenge. But this baby is innocent. Matthew stood up. Where are the original documents from the safe? Gone, Victoria smiled. Unless what? Unless you drop the takeover. Walk away. Let me leave with what I've set aside. For the baby. Richard tried to stand but stumbled. Sarah caught him before he fell. He needs a hospital, she insisted. Wait, Richard gasped. The safe in my office? There's something you all need to see. Suddenly, the lights in the restaurant went out. In the darkness, they heard Victoria's chair scrape back. Mom! Matthew shouted as a gunshot rang out. The emergency lights came on. Victoria was gone. Sarah was holding her arm, blood seeping between her fingers. It's just a graze, she said, but her voice shook. FBI agents swarmed the restaurant. Through the chaos, Matthew saw a familiar face, his mentor from Morgan Stanley watching from across the room with a satisfied smile. Dad, Matthew turned to Richard. Who else knows about the safe? Only one person, Richard whispered. Your mother's old piano teacher, the man who introduced us. Sarah's face went white. Professor Anderson? Your mentor at Morgan Stanley, Richard nodded at Matthew. He's been orchestrating everything from the beginning. The truth dawned on Matthew as another shot rang out in the darkness. The second shot missed its target as Matthew pulled Sarah down behind an overturned table. FBI agents rushed toward the kitchen where the shot had come from. Professor Anderson, Sarah said, pressing a napkin against her wound. He was more than my piano teacher. He was my father's business partner before Dad died. And my mentor at Morgan Stanley, Matthew added, checking on Richard, who was still struggling to breathe. He guided my entire career. He's been playing us all, Richard gasped. The company's system. Check the company's system. An FBI agent approached their table. We've got a situation. Someone's trying to wipe the company's servers remotely. Matthew pulled out his phone, accessing the Thompson Enterprises network. They're deleting everything. Years of records gone. Not everything, Sarah said. The backup drives in the piano. Mom, you're hurt. You need a hospital. Listen to me. Sarah's voice was urgent. Anderson didn't just teach me piano. He taught Victoria too. He's been planning this for decades. Richard grabbed Matthew's arm. The safe, in my office. There's a letter from your grandfather. Sir, we need to get you to a hospital, an FBI agent interrupted. Matthew's phone buzzed. A message from Victoria. Anderson has the drives. Meeting at the conservatory. Come alone, or they release everything to the press. Another message followed immediately. Your sister's life depends on it. He's using Victoria, Sarah realized, just like he used her father. What do you mean? Matthew asked. Henry Williams didn't just go bankrupt, Sarah explained. Anderson convinced him to invest everything in Richard's company, then tipped Richard about the weakness. I never knew, Richard said weakly. Anderson brought me all the investors. An FBI agent rushed over. Governor Harrison was just found dead in his office. Apparent suicide. No, Matthew said. Anderson's cleaning house. Sarah's phone rang. The conservatory's security system had been triggered. He's going after the piano, she said. Why? Matthew asked. We already have the documents. Because, Richard struggled to sit up. The piano doesn't just contain documents. It contains proof of what Anderson did 30 years ago. The real reason Sarah's father died. Victoria's next message was a photo. She was at the conservatory, held at gunpoint by Professor Anderson. I have to go, Matthew said. Not alone, Sarah insisted, standing despite her injury. Both of you wait. Richard pulled an envelope from his jacket. I've been carrying this since my first heart attack. It's everything Anderson didn't want found. The truth about all of us. Sir, An FBI agent interrupted. The SEC just froze all Thompson Enterprises accounts. The company's stock is crashing. Matthew looked at his phone. Anderson had triggered a massive sell-off. Years of work, thousands of jobs, all hanging by a thread. Son, Richard grabbed Matthew's hand. The company doesn't matter. Your mother, your sister, that's what matters. Sarah touched the wound on her arm. Anderson killed my father because he discovered the truth. He's been orchestrating everything. Victoria, the SEC investigation, your career at Morgan Stanley. Why? Matthew demanded. Because 30 years ago, Richard's voice was barely a whisper, Anderson stole millions from his clients. Your grandfather caught him. The proof is still in that piano. Matthew's phone lit up with a final message. 1 hour. Come alone or they both die. Your mother's studio. Through the restaurant's windows, they could see police lights reflecting off the buildings. FBI agents coordinated their positions. Richard was being loaded onto a stretcher. Sarah grabbed her son's arm. Matthew, there's something else in that piano. Something even Richard doesn't know about. But before she could finish, the restaurant's lights went out again. In the darkness, they heard footsteps running, a door slamming. When the lights came back on, Richard's envelope was gone. Sarah looked at her son, tears in her eyes. Your father wasn't the only one keeping secrets all these years. Massachusetts General Hospital's emergency room buzzed with activity as doctors worked on Richard. Sarah sat in the waiting area, her arm freshly bandaged, while Matthew paced the floor. 20 minutes left, he said, checking his phone. I have to go to the conservatory. You can't face Anderson alone. Sarah insisted. He's already killed the governor. A doctor approached them. Mr. Thompson is stable, but he had another minor heart attack. He's asking for both of you. In the hospital room, Richard lay connected to monitors. The letter, he said weakly. Anderson can't read it. What's in it? Matthew asked. The truth about your grandfather's death. It wasn't suicide like Anderson made everyone believe. Richard's monitor started beeping rapidly. Get a nurse. Sarah told Matthew. As he ran out, she leaned closer to Richard. I know what Anderson did. I've always known. How? The night my father died, he left a recording in the piano. I found it after you left me. That's why I had to protect Matthew. Matthew returned with medical staff who rushed them out of the room. His phone buzzed. Another message from Victoria. Time's running out. Anderson knows about the recording. What recording? Matthew asked his mother. Before Sarah could answer, Victoria herself appeared at the end of the hospital corridor. She was pale, her designer clothes torn. He let me go to deliver a message, she said, trembling. If you don't bring the original documents to the conservatory in 15 minutes, he'll release everything to the media. The company will collapse. Thousands will lose their jobs. You're working with him, Matthew accused. No, Victoria's hand went to her stomach. I thought I was playing him, but he was playing me all along, just like he played my father. Your father didn't just go bankrupt, Sarah said, and Anderson murdered him too. Victoria's face went white. What? The recording in the piano proves it. Your father and mine were working together to expose Anderson's scheme. That's why he had them both killed. FBI agents approached them. Mrs. Thompson, we need to ask you some questions about Governor Harrison's death. Wait, Victoria pulled out her phone. You need to see this first. She showed them surveillance footage of Anderson in the governor's office. Matthew's phone rang. It was Anderson. Speaker, Sarah said. Time to choose, Matthew. Anderson's voice was calm. Your sister's life or your mother's secret? The recording she's kept hidden all these years? What recording? Victoria demanded. The one that proves who really killed our fathers, Sarah said quietly. The FBI agents exchanged looks and stepped away to make calls. 10 minutes, Anderson said. Come alone to the studio or I release everything. The fraud, the murders, and Sarah's biggest secret, what really happened the night Richard left her. The call ended. Matthew looked at his mother. What is he talking about? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. The night your father left, Anderson came to our house. He gave Richard a choice, leave us or he'd kill us both. That's not possible, Victoria whispered. Richard left because of me. You were just another piece in Anderson's game, Sarah said. He needed someone inside the company, someone Richard would trust. Matthew's phone lit up with one final message. Time to end this where it began. The piano awaits. The hospital monitors started beeping again. Through the window, they could see doctors rushing to Richard's room. "He's crashing," a nurse shouted. Victoria grabbed Matthew's arm. "Anderson has someone else at the conservatory. A girl, she says she's your sister." Sarah touched her bandaged arm. "There's something else in that piano, something even Anderson doesn't know about." The FBI agents returned. "We've got units surrounding the conservatory, but there's a problem. Someone just accessed the building's gas lines." Matthew looked at his watch. 5 minutes left. "Mom," he said, "what really happened the night Dad left?" Sarah pulled out an old key. "Go to the piano. The truth is in the third compartment." "But Matthew," she hesitated, "some truths are harder than others." The hospital room erupted in activity as Richard's condition worsened. Victoria's phone buzzed with a message that made her face go pale. And somewhere in the conservatory, a piano held secrets that could destroy them all. The New England Conservatory stood dark against the night sky. Matthew entered through the side door, using his mother's key. The hallways were silent except for the distant sound of a piano, someone playing Chopin's Nocturne in B-flat minor. He followed the music to Sarah's studio. Through the window in the door, he saw a young woman at the piano. She looked up, and Matthew froze. She had their father's eyes. "Come in," Anderson's voice came from the shadows. "Meet your sister, Emily." The girl stopped playing. She couldn't have been more than 16. "She's not involved in this," Matthew said. "Everyone's involved." Anderson stepped into view, holding a gun. "Your mother, Victoria, your father, all pawns in a game 30 years in the making." Unknown to them, Sarah was entering the building through the basement. She moved quietly toward the hidden room where she'd stored the original Steinway all these years. Back in the studio, Anderson motioned for Matthew to sit. "Open the piano." "Why? You already have the documents." "The documents are worthless," Anderson smiled. "I want the recording your mother hid, the one she made the night your father left." In the hospital, Richard regained consciousness. "Victoria," he called out weakly. She moved closer to his bed. "Save your strength. Anderson, he threatened to kill them. That's why I left, but there's something else." His heart monitor started beeping faster. At the conservatory, Matthew lifted the piano's lid. "There's nothing here." "Try the third compartment," Anderson said. "The one Sarah mentioned." Matthew's hand found a hidden latch. Inside was an old cassette tape and a letter. "Play it," Anderson demanded. Sarah reached the hidden room. The original Steinway waited in darkness. As she lifted its lid, she heard footsteps behind her. "I wondered when you'd come." James Parker stepped out of the shadows. In the studio, Matthew inserted the tape into an old player Anderson provided. A younger Sarah's voice filled the room. "If you're listening to this, Richard, it means Anderson's plan worked. He's forcing you to leave us to protect his secret. But what he doesn't know is that I recorded everything. The murders, the fraud, and the truth about that night at the Williams house." Emily's hands trembled on the piano keys. "What is she talking about?" "Keep playing," Anderson ordered, his gun steady. In the basement, Sarah faced James. "You were just a child when it happened, when Anderson killed your father." James's hand moved to his gun. "Henry Williams was my father. Anderson saved me after your husband destroyed our family." "Henry Williams wasn't your father," Sarah said softly. "Richard was." The recording continued upstairs. "Richard, there's something else you need to know. Something I discovered after you left. It's about James, Victoria's friend from the SEC. He's your son from before we met. Henry Williams adopted him when he married his mother." Matthew looked at Anderson, whose face had gone pale. "That's why you needed him," Matthew realized. "He wasn't just another pawn. He was your backup plan." "Shut it off." Anderson's hand shook. But Sarah's voice continued. "Anderson knows. He's been using this to control everyone. The murders, the company takeover, everything was to protect his secret, that he killed his own daughter when she discovered what he'd done." Emily's finger stopped on the keys. "What?" "Your mother," Anderson's voice cracked. "She was going to expose everything." In the basement, James lowered his gun. "All these years, Anderson used you," Sarah said, "just like he used all of us." Upstairs, the recording reached its final revelation. The proof is in the original piano. Not this one, but the first Steinway. The one hidden in the basement, the one Anderson never knew about. FBI agents began moving into position around the building. Victoria arrived clutching Richard's letter. Matthew stood slowly. It was never about the company, was it? This whole thing, the fraud, the takeover, Victoria, it was all to find that recording. You don't understand. Anderson raised his gun. What I did? You killed my grandmother. Emily's voice shook. Your own daughter. Sarah and James emerged from the basement stairwell. It's over, Professor, Sarah said. Anderson spun around, his gun moving between targets. None of you are leaving here. Actually, Victoria stepped into the room. They are. She held up her phone, live streaming everything. The whole world is watching now. The original Steinway's music filled the room, a recording from 30 years ago, playing the same nocturne Emily had been practicing. A woman's voice, Anderson's daughter, detailing her father's crimes. Anderson's hands trembled. She didn't understand. None of you do. Drop the gun. James stepped forward. Father. The truth hung in the air with the last notes of Chopin. Matthew looked at his newfound siblings. James, Emily, all pawns in Anderson's game. The piano had kept its secrets for 3 decades, but now the truth would finally be heard. The board meeting will start in 5 minutes, Victoria announced, checking her phone. Thompson Enterprises' emergency board meeting had been called at midnight, with members joining virtually from across the country. Anderson's gun remained steady. You're not broadcasting anything. Check your phone, Victoria said. It's already trending on social media. Thompson's scandal. Sarah moved closer to Emily, who sat frozen at the piano. James kept his position near the door, his SEC badge now visible. You were FBI all along, Matthew realized, looking at James. Deep cover, James nodded. Started investigating Anderson 3 years ago. Found out about being Richard's son 6 months in. Anderson's phone buzzed. The board meeting notification. They're voting to dissolve the company, Victoria said. Unless what? Anderson demanded. Unless the truth comes out. All of it. Not just your part, but everyone's. In the hospital, Richard watched the live stream on his phone, tears rolling down his face as he saw all his children together for the first time. Matthew accessed the company's system from his tablet. The stock's in free fall, thousands of jobs at stake. Play the rest of the recording, Sarah said quietly. Anderson's hand tightened on the gun. Don't. But Emily had already pressed play. Her grandmother's voice filled the room. Dad, I found the proof. The missing client's money, the murders, everything. But there's something else. Something about Richard Thompson's company. Stop it, Anderson moved toward the piano. The company was built on stolen money, the voice continued. Not Richard's theft. Yours. You used his ambition, his dream to hide your crimes. And now you're going to kill me, aren't you, Dad? The recording captured a struggle, a gunshot. Emily's hands trembled over the keys. You killed her because she found out you were stealing from your clients. I built that company, Anderson shouted. Richard was nothing without my investments. Stolen money, James said. From your own clients, your own daughter. Victoria's phone showed the board meeting starting. We have to decide now, the truth or thousands lose everything. Matthew looked at his mother. Sarah nodded. Play my recording, she said. The one from the night Richard left. The second tape started. They heard younger Sarah's voice. Richard, by the time you hear this, Anderson will have forced you to leave us. But you need to know, the company isn't built on stolen money anymore. I replaced it, every dollar from my father's estate. The company is clean, has been for years. Anderson's been chasing a ghost. Anderson's face went white. Impossible. Check the records, Sarah said. Why do you think I really sold the piano? The money didn't go to Richard's project, it went to repay your victims. Victoria pulled up the company's original banking records on her tablet. She's right, the stolen money was replaced in 1989. Then what was all this for? Emily asked. Power, James said. Control, he couldn't let go of either. Matthew's tablet showed the board meeting live feed. They're about to vote. Wait, Victoria interrupted the virtual meeting. Before you vote, you need to see this. She shared Sarah's recording. As the truth played for the board members, Anderson finally lowered his gun. I spent 30 years, he whispered. All this time. Chasing shadows, Sarah finished, while destroying lives. FBI agents moved into the room, led by James. Professor Anderson, you're under arrest for the murder of Catherine Anderson, Henry Williams, and George Mitchell. As Anderson was handcuffed, Emily started playing again, the same nocturne, but this time it carried the weight of 3 decades of secrets. Victoria's phone buzzed. The board's decision Thompson Enterprises would survive, restructured under new leadership. "Matthew," she said, "they want you as CEO." He looked at his newfound siblings, James, Emily, then at his mother. "No, we do this together, all of us." Sarah touched the piano's keys beside her daughter. "Family first. That's what Richard and I forgot 30 years ago." Through the live stream in his hospital room, Richard watched his children stand together. He picked up his phone to make one last call, one that would change everything again. "You should all come to the hospital." Richard's voice was weak, but clear on the speakerphone. "There's something you need to know." The group arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital 30 minutes later. Emily still seemed shocked by the night's revelations, while James maintained his FBI agent's composure. Matthew walked beside Sarah, who hadn't said a word since leaving the conservatory. Richard's room was dimly lit. Victoria stood by the window, her hand protectively over her stomach. "My children," Richard said, looking at them all. "James, Matthew, Emily, I failed each of you in different ways." "Dad, you need to rest," Matthew started. "No," Richard insisted. "You need to hear this now." He pulled out another envelope from under his pillow. "This is my new will. I'm dissolving Thompson Enterprises." Victoria turned sharply. "What?" "The company will be reformed as a trust," Richard continued. "Sarah will control 50%. The remaining 50 will be split equally among my children. All of my children." James stepped forward. "I don't want anything from you." "It's not for you," Richard said. "It's for the families of everyone Anderson hurt. The trust will help them rebuild their lives." Sarah finally spoke. "That's what I tried to do 30 years ago. Make things right." "I know," Richard's voice cracked. "I found the records of your payments to Anderson's victims. You sold everything, not just the piano." Emily sat at the edge of her father's bed. "Why didn't you ever look for me?" "Anderson told me you died at birth." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Just like he told James's mother, I died in an accident before he was born." Victoria moved closer. "The baby I'm carrying, James isn't the father." Everyone turned to look at her. "I lost that baby 2 months ago," she admitted. "I used the pregnancy to manipulate the situation, to protect myself." She paused. "I'm turning myself in. The FBI already has my full confession." James nodded. "We'll need your testimony against Anderson." Matthew checked his phone. "The market opens in 3 hours. What do you want me to tell the board?" "Tell them the truth," Sarah said. "All of it. The company was built on stolen money, but it was made clean through sacrifice. Now it's time for it to help heal the wounds it caused." Richard pressed a button, raising his bed slightly. "There's something else. Anderson had a partner, someone who's been watching all of us for years." "Professor Chen," Sarah whispered. "My father's best friend. He's been running the Asian operations," Richard confirmed. "Moving money, hiding evidence." James was already on his phone. "FBI teams are moving in on his location." Emily's hands moved unconsciously, playing piano notes on her leg. "Will they arrest him too?" "They already have," James said, reading a message. "He's agreeing to testify against Anderson." Richard looked at Sarah. "I tried to find you 5 years after I left." "I know," she said. "I saw you outside the school where I was teaching, but I couldn't risk Anderson finding Matthew." Victoria stepped toward the door. "The FBI is waiting for me downstairs. I'll tell them everything I know about Chen's operations." "Wait," Richard called. "Thank you for coming forward, for helping end this." She nodded once and left. Matthew sat in the chair beside his father's bed. "What happens now?" "Now," Richard said, "we build something new, something honest." He looked at each of his children. "Something together." Sarah moved to the window. Dawn was breaking over Boston. "Mom," Matthew said, "there's one more secret, isn't there? Something in the original piano you haven't told us." She turned back to the room. "Yes, something that will change everything again." Emily stood up. "The last recording, the one hidden in the false bottom." James checked his watch. "Chen will be interrogated in an hour. Whatever it is, we need to know now." Richard reached for Sarah's hand. "Tell them, it's time." Sarah took a deep breath. "The night Anderson forced Richard to leave, he gave me a choice too. One I never told anyone about, not even Richard." The room fell silent as she reached into her purse and pulled out one final tape. Sarah held the final tape in her trembling hands. Before I play this, you need to understand something. Anderson didn't just threaten to kill us that night. He offered me a choice that would have saved everything. What choice? Matthew asked. He wanted me to sign papers claiming Richard had embezzled the money. In exchange, he would have let us keep our life together. The company, the family, everything. Richard's heart monitor beeped faster. Sarah? She inserted the tape into a small player she'd brought from the conservatory. Anderson's voice filled the hospital room. Just sign the papers, Sarah. Richard will go to jail, but you and your baby will be set for life. All his assets will transfer to you. Young Sarah's voice responded. And if I don't, then Richard leaves you, today. He never sees his child. You lose everything, but he stays free, running the company under my control. You chose to let him go, Emily realized. I chose to save your father's freedom, Sarah said, even if it meant losing him. James stood straighter, his FBI training failing to mask his emotion. But that's not all that's on the tape, is it? No. Sarah pressed play again. They heard shuffling, then a gunshot, Anderson cursing, a door slamming. Anderson tried to kill you that night, Matthew said. He killed someone else. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Professor Chen's wife. She was there to warn me about Anderson. She died saving my life. Richard struggled to sit up. Chen wasn't Anderson's partner. No, Sarah confirmed. He was working undercover, for 30 years gathering evidence. His wife's death was written off as a suicide, just like Anderson's daughter. The tape continued playing. They heard Chen's voice. I'll keep building the evidence, Sarah, but you have to protect Richard's children, all of them. Anderson doesn't know about James yet, or the baby Emily's mother is carrying. Emily covered her mouth. That's how you knew about all of us. Chen kept me informed, Sarah nodded. He helped me track each of you, make sure you were safe, even helped me buy back the original piano. James checked his phone. Chen's interrogation just started. He's giving them everything. The company's stocks are suspended, Matthew added, looking at his tablet. The market's waiting for our statement. Richard reached for Sarah's hand. Tell them the rest. She took a deep breath. Chen and I did more than protect you. We've spent 30 years building a case against everyone involved in Anderson's schemes. The evidence isn't just in the piano. It's in every major financial institution in Boston. The trust fund Victoria mentioned, Matthew said. It's not just for Anderson's victims, is it? It's all the money we recovered, Sarah confirmed. Billions, hidden in plain sight. Every dirty deal, every bribe, every theft, we tracked it all. Emily moved to the window. The sun was rising over Boston, painting the sky in shades of hope. The conservatory, she said suddenly. The benefit concert tonight. Everyone will be watching. Richard nodded. The perfect time to tell the world the truth. Not just tell it, James added. Show it. We have all the evidence now. Matthew stood. We do this together, as a family. Sarah pressed play one final time. The last seconds of the tape captured Chen's wife's final words. Love is stronger than greed, Sarah. Remember that. Richard's monitor showed his heart rate stabilizing. I spent 30 years chasing wealth, power, success. I had a fortune, but I lost my family. Not lost, Emily said, taking his hand. Just waiting. Matthew's phone buzzed. The FBI had finished Chen's interrogation. He gave them everything. Names, dates, accounts. It's over. No, Sarah said, looking at her family reunited at last. It's just beginning. The morning sun filled the room as Boston awakened to a new day. In a few hours, they would face the world together. The truth would finally be told, not just about Anderson's crimes, but about love, sacrifice, and redemption. Emily moved to her father's side. James stood next to Sarah. Matthew looked at them all, his family finally whole. Richard squeezed Sarah's hand. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe not, she said softly, but love isn't about deserving, it's about choosing. And I choose this. Us. All of us. The New England Conservatory's Grand Hall was filled to capacity. News of the Thompson scandal had drawn national attention, and the benefit concert had become the focal point of Boston's biggest story in decades. Sarah sat at her restored Steinway, the piano that had kept their secrets for 30 years. In the front row, Richard watched from his wheelchair, surrounded by their children. Matthew, James, and Emily sat together, a family united after years of separation. Behind them, FBI agents stood guard, ensuring Anderson's remaining allies couldn't interfere. Victoria had chosen to watch from the back, her testimony against Anderson and Chen ensuring a lighter sentence. Her role in exposing the truth had earned her a measure of redemption. As Sarah's fingers touched the keys, she began playing the piece she'd composed over 30 years, a musical journey of their family's story. Each note carried the weight of secrets kept, sacrifices made, and love that had endured despite everything. The hall fell silent as Emily joined her mother at the piano. Mother and daughter played together, their duet telling the story that words alone couldn't express. In the audience, Boston's elite watched as their world of privilege and power was transformed by the truth. Richard closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. The music brought back every moment, meeting Sarah, their early struggles, his ambitious dreams, the choice Anderson forced him to make, and the years of regret that followed. Matthew stood to address the audience. Tonight isn't just about exposing corruption. It's about healing. The Thompson Family Trust will restore what was taken from Anderson's victims, but more than that, it will fund music education for underprivileged children across the country. James, still in his FBI suit, took the podium next. The evidence we've gathered has exposed corruption at every level, but it's also shown us the power of integrity. One woman's choice to protect her family and seek justice, no matter the cost. Emily's voice joined her brother's. Our father built his empire on a dream, not knowing it was tainted by Anderson's crimes. Our mother spent 30 years making it right. Tonight, we begin a new chapter. The music swelled as Sarah played the final movement of her composition. The piece ended not with triumph, but with reconciliation, soft, healing notes that spoke of forgiveness and new beginnings. Richard was helped to the stage by his children. His voice, though weak, carried clearly through the hall. I spent my life chasing wealth, blind to the true riches I had. My children, my wife, my family, they were the real fortune I threw away. Today, we start over. The restructured Thompson Enterprises would become the Thompson Family Foundation, dedicated to ethics in business and supporting the arts. The billions recovered from Anderson's schemes would help rebuild lives he had destroyed. Sarah played one final piece, the same Chopin nocturne that had brought her and Richard together all those years ago. As the last notes faded, she felt his hand on her shoulder. Their journey had come full circle. The next morning, newspapers across the country carried the story, not just of Anderson's crimes or Chen's long undercover operation, but of a family rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. The headlines spoke of redemption, of justice served not through revenge, but through truth and reconciliation. Victoria visited Richard in the hospital one last time before beginning her reduced sentence. Her testimony had helped close dozens of corruption cases. I learned too late what really matters, she told him. Don't waste your second chance. Emily took over Sarah's position at the conservatory, teaching music to a new generation. James returned to the FBI, his experience making him a leading expert in financial crimes. Matthew guided the foundation, ensuring their family's legacy would be one of healing, not harm. And in Sarah's studio, the two Steinways stood side by side, one that had hidden their secrets and one that had revealed their truth. She played them both each morning, reminding herself that music, like love, could bridge any distance, heal any wound. Richard recovered slowly, but with his family's support, he grew stronger. He spent his days not in boardrooms, but in music rooms, listening to his daughter teach, watching his grandchildren learn to play, surrounded by the love he'd almost lost forever. The Thompson scandal became a case study in business schools across America, not just for its exposure of corruption, but for its lesson in redemption. It showed that even the greatest mistakes could be corrected, that love could transcend betrayal, that truth would always find its way to light. Sarah and Richard renewed their vows in the conservatory's grand hall, their children playing the wedding march. Their story had come full circle, from young love to betrayal to redemption, proving that sometimes the longest road leads you back home. The final note of their story wasn't played on a piano. It was written in the lives they touched, the wrongs they made right, and the family they rebuilt, stronger than ever before. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Have you ever experienced the power of forgiveness in your own life? Subscribe to our channel for more touching stories that remind us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love we give and receive. Remember, sometimes the greatest fortunes are the ones money can't buy: family, forgiveness, and second chances. Join our community of over 2 million subscribers who believe in the power of love and redemption. Hit that notification bell to never miss a story that could change your heart forever. Life's greatest riches are stored not in bank vaults, but in the hearts that choose love over wealth.